Hello everyone, it's Teferi07. Today we are playing a 5-color or 4-color, whatever you want, Reanimator Brew. Okay, so this is so far from the 5-color, 4-color Reanimator brews. You have mostly seen Goryo's type of brews with Atraxa, Grizzlebrand, Emrakul, that kind of stuff. But I think currently I really want to be using a Persist with the Grief and the Solitude. And I really want for this deck for the Grief and Solitude scam with Ephemerate and Persist together with some other creatures like Fable, Evangel of Synthesis be my plan A, and also Troll of Khazad-dum with Persist works very well. Can be very aggressive turn 2 5/4 creature that is not easy to block and not easy to bolt and kill. So I want these creatures to be my plane A, and then just have the Archon here, which is synergistic with our Persist, Evangel, Fable, which also works well with our Elementals. Okay, so definitely in the mix we have Touch of the Spirit Realm and One Ring. These two cards work really well together. So, and the Touch also works well with Grief and Solitude. It's another blink spell that helps you scam the elementals in. But I think this touch is much more valuable now than it was before the One Ring. Often in a lot of situations, you'll be trying to find a card from the top of your deck to blink your One Ring to prevent further life loss. And touch is very good there. It just blinks uncounterable the ring and puts it back on the field end of turn with 0 counters on it. You won't get protection because you didn't cast it, but still it's very useful ability. Teferi can be used the same way to bounce the One Ring when you need it. It's also great strategy, just bouncing the One Ring with Teferi against decks like Burn, which means they can't harm you on their turn, but they can also do anything on your turn because of the fairy. And yeah, okay, so a lot of tricks in this deck. Another one is, as I already said, putting Troll turn 1 into the graveyard, some cycling, finding a land, and turn 2 going for the Persist immediately on Troll. It puts a 5/4 creature very hard to block, and it's definitely no joke. Opponent has to do something about it, and while opponent is taking care of this, you get time to do some other more powerful stuff that can be done in this deck. Fable and Evangel of Synthesis are my choices for putting Archon into the graveyard in this list. I found Evangel being better than cards like Tainted Indulgence or the what is it called, the blue-white one, which draws in these cards, gaining life, because at the moment you really want to be building some kind of board position, and Evangel does this. Plus, I think drawing one card is currently better than two, because drawing two cards can sometimes be a blowout when your opponent is playing Orcish Bowmasters. Okay, so at least when you play the Evangel and you draw just one, uh, you won't get too much burned by Bowmasters. Okay, but it's not just that. Evangel of Synthesis works very well in this deck. There is plenty of card draw, and the One Ring provides a steady turn after turn card draw, triggering Evangel of Synthesis, giving it menace and +1. Also, the fairy and another Evangel or Ephemerated Evangel does this too, along with the Fable, of course. So, Archon also. So, all this can be very relevant. And I have succeeded to build 18 card mana base that works very well for the current setup. Together with 4 of these Swamp Cyclers, it provides a very useful mana base, which I had a really good success with in the about 30-40 matches I played. I had a total of above a 70% win rate, and the deck felt favorable, and score was good against all currently top tier matchups at the moment. And I think this could be a good choice. to fight those matchups like 4-color Romnat, Scam, even Tron with Archon and Break the Ice on the sideboard. It's I think I like the sideboard as it is for the current open meta game on the MTGO, but it definitely can be tweaked to some specific meta games. Like Break the Ice is a very good card at the moment against the Throne. Spell Pierce, Teferi obviously against those Cascade decks. But the current main plan of the deck is very efficient and works very well consistently. And really deck attacks from various corners, and I think it's very hard to play against. And I tweaked it for a while. I went through a few different builds, and this one was my favorite so far. I can say I'm 100% sure this is my definite build for this archetype. But at the moment, I'm happy with this, and it definitely is the one that I will play in the future and think about more. Okay, so I finished a 5-0 league with this deck, getting a trophy. So we will now go through all the games and see how it went. So as you can see, all of the matches went 2-0 except for the last one. Okay, let's see how it went. Match 1, game 1. Playing first, having turn 2 Evangel, discarding Archon, but unfortunately opponent goes for the Totsis. It's still a good situation because I have Fable for turn 3 and also One Ring for turn 4, so feeling pretty good here. In a match 1 I played against Black-White Scam. They went for the Stoneforge on turn 1. That was fine by me. I didn't really care that much about Kaldra hitting the field. I still had a ring I could play on turn 4, which will prevent the damage for the next turn, which will give me enough time to try to do something. I discarded Archon and another card, played my 4th land, attacked with the Goblin Shaman, and played my One Ring, started drawing cards, hoping to draw something for the next turn, of course. Okay, so the ring was there, opponent went for the Vindicate, kill my Fable. It was fine, I continued drawing card with One Ring. As you can see, it was just a lot of Solitudes and Ephemerates, which is basically a game over for my opponent. So I Solitude the Caldra, attacked with the Goblin Shaman to get the treasure token, so I can Ephemerate my Solitude if needed. Basically, opponent goes for the Grief, and just I go for Ephemerate response, so they see my hand and concede. That was the game. So let's check out the second one. In the game 2, I kept a pretty decent hand, so have the Troll turn 1, get Swamp, Persist the Troll turn 2 if I want, or I can also just scam Grief with Persist, or Solitude, so a lot of options here, all of them are pretty good. Opponent go, I wait to see what will opponent do, they go for the Stoneforge, so I decide it's best to just take the Caldra from their hand and go for the Grief. So I decide go for the Grief first, see what happens, exile one of the Trolls, getting the Caldra out. Then I persist the Grief and see their hand, which was Grief, double Solitude and One Ring. So I take out One Ring, leaving them with double Solitude and Grief in hand. So I decided to Persist the Troll, but they top decked the Vanishing Verse. They didn't want to use the Solitude. I attacked and plus the Teferi, and I wanted to just bounce the Grief next turn and replay it. So I first attacked for 2 damage, bounce the Grief, play the land, holding Leyline Binding 2, and hard casting my Grief, seeing double Grief, double Solitude in their hand. Again, my opponent misplayed here. They attacked into the Grief. I don't know why, but they basically just hardcast their Grief, see the Solitude and Binding in my hand, and yeah, they just decided to concede after that. That was it. They still had decent hand, double Solitude. They could have waited to draw another land, maybe get back into the game, but they just decided it was enough for them. So that's it. Okay, game 1. Let's check out match 2. In the match 2, I was playing first. Kept again a decent hand. I had a Persist, but needed another black card to go for the double Grief, turn 2. Opponent, it was a burn, and the opponent started with a Swiss Spear. I took Raugrin Triome and the Indatha Triome and decided to wait with the Grief and just exile the Swiss Spear. Opponent went for the second Swiss Spear, and that's it. So I decided to bounce the Swiss Spear and take the Swiss Spear out of their hand with the Grief. Opponent then went for the Boros Charm and the Skewer, playing the Canyon. So then I went for the Persist, and I had the Teferi on the field, so I could just use the Ephemerate on their draw step, taking the last card from their hand. They went for they went for a draw a card, burn me, put me on a 4. But at this point, I was attacking them. They needed double burn spell to finish me off. They had okay chances, but I drew into another Ephemerate, which means again, in their draw step, I will be able to do the Ephemerate thing if I want, but I decided to just kill my Solitude. And I draw into to kill my Teferi, and I draw into Solitude, exiling their Goblin Guide, and I was now able to gain 3 life, and had lethal and 2 swingbacks. So that was it for the opponent. They didn't have any outs, so that was the game. Let's check out the game 2. I found a burn matchup to be pretty easy, which is pretty good at the moment, and you will see that this game was a very quick one. Basically, I went for the Godless Shrine, exiled, went for the Grief Ephemerate on turn 1, and my opponent immediately concedes the game, so they went for the Boros Charm, and they rebounded the Grief and took the last card from their hand, and yeah, that was it. Yeah, they kept on for a few more turns, but it was they didn't really have a much chance. I was still on 8 life, and they were on 0 cards in hand. I went for Teferi, bounce my Evangel, recast the Evangel, do another draw, redraw. They went for a couple more second land, draw a card. Then I cast Fable, bring back the Troll, and I had the lethal for next turn. They had 0 cards, so that was the game. Okay, so let's check out the match 3. Okay, in the match 3, I kept kind of greedy one-lander, but I did have turn 1 Solitude Ephemerate, and then Persist on the Solitude if they kill it. I also top-decked Grief, and I still had the Touch of the Spirit Realm. This was a really weird game where I just took the opponent didn't have a good hand. They just went for a double Arboreal Grazer, and I took the Dryad from their hand, which was only usable card at this point for them. They were now on no cards in hand. In the top deck mode, I was attacking for a 3 with Grief, and just I wasn't able to find that second land. I did have a Solitude in case they find a Dryad or Titan, so definitely it wasn't over. It was a fair game. Opponent goes for the Relic. And yeah, so I had Solitude in my hand and that really needed to kill Karn, and I drew into second one too, so I just discarded, exiled the Binding and Solituded one of the Grazers so they can't block a Grief, so I just finished off the Karn. And still wasn't able to find that second land I needed, but still holding another Solitude, and finally now I got that land I wanted. Opponent draws a Mycosynth Gardens, copying a Relic of Progenitus, then sacrifices one of the relics to draw a card. End of turn. I used that situation to try to blink the Grief, try to see if they draw something. I don't know why they did that end of turn. If they didn't do that end of turn, they probably feared me killing the relic in response, so their Mycosynth Gardens goes away or whatever, I don't know, but I was able to discard the second card from their hand, put them on 2 and cast my Fable, and now opponent was in tricky situation and wasn't able to prevent damage next turn, and yeah, they concede. So pretty strange game where I was just mana screwed hardly, and still won. I decided to mulligan that one and decided to go with this one. Opponent sides in the Stone of Erech, but I don't. It really doesn't do anything against me. It does exile the graveyard for 2 mana if I try to go for the Archon Persist, but yeah, okay, so not that great still. Okay, so I decided to take the Karn and the Titan. Opponent still had a Cultivator, they had Azusa, so they went for they top deck Forest, played the Boyuka, and now they had a Cultivator in their hand. Didn't draw a land, but Troll, so I put a land on the field in case so I can play the Fable or Ring next turn. Opponents still have mana short from casting the Cultivator, and even if they cast it, they don't really get much from it. So they just went with Grazer. I do the Fable thing. I had Ephemerate and the One Ring. So first I decided to go for the attacks, see how they block. And after that, I go for the One Ring, draw a card, then Ephemerate, remove the Cultivator from opponent's hand. So at this point, they were again on 0 cards in the top deck mode. Very hard situation. Even if they top deck the Titan, they don't have the Amulet. Or even if they top deck Dryad, then they don't have a Valakut or lands in hand for the Cultivator. But they did actually top deck the best they could. At this point, just a Karn for the Metamorph, copy the One Ring, and prevent me from using my One Ring. So this was actually pretty good. Okay, so I again use the swap cycling, get the swamp on the field, and then I had a 4 mana open. I kill the Azusa and decide to Prismatic put their Karn on 2, and the Prismatic Ending remove their copy of the One Ring. I still wasn't able to use the One Ring, but I had a good chance to killing a Karn and then using the One Ring, of course. So I obviously killed the Karn. I shocked in a Blood Crypt and used the Grief instant speed on their draw step, so they actually didn't have much to do here, but they were only able to go for Tolaria West, find Giant, but it doesn't matter because I still had the lethal, and that was the game. Okay, so let's go for match 4. Okay, in the match 4, keeping a decent hand, I had Evangel turn 2, some cycling possible on 1. So pretty good hand against again against Burn. Our opponent I went for the troll and revealed, I think, Ephemerate on a Goblin Guide. So that's when I decided to not use the Solitude immediately, but to wait for a turn. When they attacked again, I went for the Solitude, exile the Guide, go for the Ephemerate, and opponent didn't have a removal at this time to kill the Solitude. They suspended the Rift Bolt instead. So I didn't use the Ephemerate, but I attacked with Solitude to gain life. Then discarded a second Solitude from my hand, so I can play the One Ring next turn with the Marsh Flats. Opponent had to use the Rift Bolt to kill my Solitude to prevent me from gaining more life. And now I was already on 4 mana. I was able to use the One Ring, so I had the protection until next step. So I was able to start attacking with Evangel. My opponent was already on 12. And yeah, they top deck a land, but just they probably weren't able to target with the Searing Blaze, and they decide to concede the game immediately. So that's it. Okay, let's check out the second one. As I said, I think Burn felt as a pretty good matchup. They don't really have a good hate for the Archon, Persist. So and also Grief. Either Grief or Solitude, turn 1 against them is pretty good. So again, I went for the Grief. I took the Bolt, Ephemerate, took another Burn spell, leaving them with just with the Skullcrack. And I passed the turn, and the opponent, I don't know what they drew, but they immediately conceded. I also had the Solitude for their Goblin Guide, so it would be pretty much over soon. Okay, so that was it. That were very easy games against Burn 2 times. So the last match was against the Glimpse combo. So I'm a kind of dependent on my Teferis, 2 of Teferis in the main, and of course getting Archon early on the field. But here is another good example how you can keep a one lander with a troll. So you can discard troll, turn 1, get the land you need. Turn 2, I can go for both for the Persist or Evangel. Opponent suspends the Rift Sower and goes for the Fable. They're playing Glimpse combo, of course. I went for the Marsh Flats, hoping to find that Teferi. I exiled their Goblin Shaman immediately, and they had another land to go for the Fury. So I casted the Fury. I casted the Persist, sorry, to get Solitude, exile Fury, cast my Evangel to try to find that Archon or whatever, and I cast my Grief, exile the card, but opponent top decks, I think, Shardless Agent, which was definitely the best top deck. Yeah, they top decked the Violent Outburst, which was really, really good for them. They had a lot of permanents, and they drew into, I think, just one card. And Again, that one card on top was Violent Outburst, second Violent Outburst, so that means they had double Violent Outburst on top, which is pretty crazy. And yeah, they had 0 cards in hand, and while it was a difficult situation, I think still this wasn't unwinnable. I think with the one ring, I still had a chance to turn this game around. But opponent draw one card with Omnat, and that card was Karn, so that's definitely sealed the game. I wasn't able to use the one ring, so that was definitely best 3 top decks I saw from didn't saw that's a good 3 top decks for a long time. Okay, so that was the only game I actually lost in this league. I had a pretty good hand on the game too. Double Evangel, discarding Archon into Persist Ephemerate. I think that is pretty hard to beat. Okay, my opponent started with a gemstone and the plant token. This means they can go for a turn 3 or sorry turn 2 glimpse, but usually glimpses this early with this variant they just don't have that strong cards that can finish the game on the spot, so they didn't do much with this. I usually wouldn't play this game like this, so I went for the Archon. I ephemerate the Archon. I had a couple of draws and I drew into Grief, so they were already discarded 2 cards, so I went for the Grief Pitchcast. Looking in their hand, discarding Karn, leaving them with just a Misty Rainforest. They actually top decked Shardless Agent again, which was again a pretty crazy top deck, but this time this wasn't enough. They just get the Wave Sifter, and yeah, so I went for another Archon, and I don't know why, but my I just wanted to play the Leyline Binding or their Wave Sister, but they decided to sack it on the Archon ability, which means with Ephemerate I had immediate kill, so that was the game. Okay, let's check out the last game of the league, the trophy game. I had Teferi plus Spell Pierce. This felt pretty good, but opponent started with a double Leyline of Sanctity, which means my Archons doesn't work well against them while the Leyline is on the field, and I also had a misplay in this last game, which almost costed me the match, but I had a bit of luck. So I had to hold Spell Pierce. I wasn't able to just go for this immediately. My opponent draws a card, plays Wooded Foothills. So at this point, I was afraid them playing next turn like Shardless Agent with a backup Mystical Dispute, something like that. So I didn't go for Teferi on my turn. I decided to use the Spell Pierce because now they were tapped out and I was pretty safe from for resolving my Teferi. So I just bounced one of the ley lines, basically forcing them to replay, or if they don't replay it, I'll maybe be able to 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 bounce the second one. Yeah, so once I got the Archon on the field, their priority was to put that Leyline back on the field, but I was able to attack with my Archons for 5 damage flying. I didn't had no ability because of the Leyline, but still it's a 5/5 flyer, so I have my Teferi on the field. So at this point, I just needed to kill the Karns. Just attack them in the air and just hold my Teferi alive so they can't start doing the combo or something. Next turn, I decided to use the Teferi, but this was a mistake. This was definitely misplay. I should have just plus the Teferi, put it on 5 counters, so they can possibly kill it with a Fury. This was, yeah, definitely a big mistake. Opponents then replayed the Leyline of Sanctity, and I didn't have. They needed to do this this turn. I kind of forced them to go for this, but I didn't have a way to bounce this Leyline, second one, and they would not be able to go for both a Leyline and One Ring. So this was definitely a mistake. Now they were able to kill my Teferi and go start doing the combo thing. And while it's not very easy for them to just win out of this situation against 3 Archons on the field and them on 5 life, they definitely had some. They definitely had chances. So they went for the glimpse here with the outburst. Found the Karn, Fable, a lot of stuff. Yeah, so they went for a second Shardless, and this version of Glimpse deck is not like the version with the big mana spells, so they kind of need a lot of things here. And this was a good hit. Now they hit Omnat to gain some life. They hit a Karn. But obviously they didn't have any more good targets with the Karn in this situation. And they didn't have a solution to survive a next turn against 3 Archons. They also lost all their ley lines with their glimpse abilities, so they were facing 3 Archon attacks abilities on the attack and a lot of damage in the air. So they that was it. Okay, that was the game. Okay, so that was the entire league. Hope you enjoyed the gameplay. I hope you liked the deck. So if you want to help the channel, please click like, click subscribe, comment in the video. Everything helps the channel. So that's it for today. Thank you for watching until now, and goodbye.